since worked to establish deaf-accessible mental health programs at hospitals nationwide. Even knowing this, when I first cracked In the Sign, I was nervous about how an older book might portray deafness. Quickly, though, my worries were allayed. From its first pages, it's clear how effective Greenberg is at capturing the nuances of deaf culture. Originally published in 1970, the novel details the lives of deaf couple Abel and Janice Ryder, from their school days up through their eldest grandchild's college years, a timeline that spans from the 1920s to the 1960s. Abel's rural upbringing and attempted mainstream education result in language deprivation, an isolating syndrome that not only affects one's ability to communicate but also eventually causes cognitive damage. Most of Abel's childhood confusion and fear are crystallized in an upsetting sequence in which his mother shouts "ooh" at him repeatedly, then sends him into town alone, where he sits in a strange room all day. He does not realize until decades later, after learning ASL and having children of his own, that she must have been saying school. At the time of In the Sign's publication, ASL had been recognized as a language for only about a decade. It was previously understood as gestures, or a bastardized version of English on the hands. As a result, American deaf education was only just beginning to wriggle out of the ironclad grip of the oralist ideology that had near unanimous rule since the late 19th century. Pure oralists believed that deaf people must be taught to speak and lip read, and that sign language should be eradicated. Children caught waving hands were punished, their hands tied to desks, slammed in drawers, and struck with rulers. Eventually, Abel is freed from the confines of his isolation when he is sent to a school for the deaf as a teenager and begins to learn sign language. The school itself, though, is oral, as would have been typical of the 1920s, meaning the site of most deaf students' education was not inside the classroom at all. Every day for 2 hours, candles were blown out to make the letter P, and mouths moved to letters and pictures on the blackboard, and the students stared at tongues and teeth and lips. Dill, till, still, skill. But the words, the real words, were behind the outhouse, waiting, the language given and taken quickly at the fence. The forbidden signs made their users rich. Oralist programming prevented a lot of deaf children from reaching their academic potential. However, the gathering of deaf people together in campus spaces allowed the children themselves to pull one another up out of language deprivation to a degree. Abel began very slowly to wonder about words and thoughts themselves. Perhaps there were words for things not seen or touched. The more words Abel learned, the more things had meaning. The more meaning, the more memory. Simultaneously, Abel's new love for language bleeds into his admiration for a fellow student, Janice. Because Janice grew up boarding at the deaf school, she has always had sign, which is the thing that draws him to her. How busy she was and how wise, with plans and ideas, with friends, angers, and the small wars of enemies. To Abel, hand-mute in the mind silence of his farm and hearing school, these plans and arguments were so wide a life that they seemed magic. Meanwhile, Janice, who is more educated than Abel but has rarely left the confines of the school, is enamored of the possibility of outside that he represents. Janice loved the idea of traveling. She loved all motion, all change, and Abel, who had spent his life in the world, who must have traveled easily from farm to town to city, seemed to her and the others a prince of promise. Like many young people, Janice and Abel are in love with the idea of each other, and of the gaps in their own lives the other might fill. They quickly bond and plan to build a life together. While Abel delights in his new ability to make sense of the world around him through language, ultimately the school has left both him and Janice ill-prepared to navigate a hearing world designed to hide and eventually eradicate them. The idea behind the pure oralist movement